Natasha Hausdorff to Thinking Aloud. Natasha is a barrister at the Six Pump Court Chambers, a frequent speaker on international law, and a commentator on the Arab-Israeli conflict. She clerked for the late Chief Justice Miriam Naor, president of Israel's Supreme Court, and was a fellow at Columbia Law School's National Security Law Program. Natasha read law at Oxford University, qualified as a solicitor at Skadden, and subsequently gained an LLM from Tel Aviv University, specializing in public international law. Natasha serves as a legal director for UK Lawyers for Israel Charitable Trust. And the reason we're having this conversation right now is because Natasha was just in Los Angeles with Douglas Murray, and she'll be back to LA to engage in a debate with Cenk Uygur, a debate on Israel and international law and the ICC at UCLA. It'll be an in-depth debate as they examine the developing situation in the Middle East and the approach of the International Criminal Court. This dynamic discussion will delve into the intersection of international law and politics and consider the implication upon the ongoing Israel-Hamas-Hezbollah war. Don't miss this chance to witness two thought leaders exchange powerful arguments on one of the most pressing global issues. The event will be held in the law school, and you will be on November 13th, and you will be able to stream it through the Free Press. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome to Valley Beth Shalom and Thinking Aloud, Natasha Hausdorff. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. It's my pleasure to be with you virtually at the moment, but in a couple of weeks in person, I'm sure.
Well, let me ask you, tell me a little bit about your life and how it's changed since October 7th. It seems like all of our lives have changed, and for spokespeople, perhaps even more so. Were you as outspoken before October 7th in terms of defending Israel and explaining her within the context of international law, or was this a calling that fell on your shoulders that morning?
Well, thank you so much for the very kind introduction. I have to say it's a calling that I've embraced for well over a decade. And albeit the practice of speaking about Israel and international law and seeking to push back on so many of the misrepresentations on that subject is something that I'd say, well versed in, or at least I was doing it sometimes 7 days a week. The platform from which I have been able to do that over the last 12 months is certainly transformed. And the audiences that I've been able to reach have essentially been unprecedented. I've been tremendously grateful for the incredible support that I've received from around the world. It's clear that there are many people who certainly have seen past a lot of the misrepresentations, but have certainly valued it, the issues and arguments being articulated perhaps more broadly than they were previously. So the massive transformation has been perhaps the volume and scale and demand for the discussion of these sorts of topics. But I'm very privileged to have been involved with an organization called UK Lawyers for Israel for well over 10 years now. And with colleagues there, we have certainly been making this case for many, many years.
When it comes to the ICC, when it comes to international law, what do you think are the biggest misconceptions when it comes to Israel and the way that the IDF conducts itself?
Well, one of the key misconceptions that is perhaps common to both, but also frequently repeated in the media, is that Israel is breaking international law. And I often find myself, when faced with that particular accusation, the question I most want to ask is, which law? And I think you'll find that many people who not only embrace but often repeat that accusation will be hard pressed to articulate one because it is a false claim. Certainly in the context of Israel's operations in Gaza over the last 12 months, that claim has been most frequently articulated through allegations of war crimes and allegations of breaches of international humanitarian law. Again, I would posit entirely unfounded, or at least to the extent that they are founded or people seek to justify them, that is invariably predicated on misinformation. information that I think that UK Lawyers for Israel, amongst others, has been pretty instrumental in pushing back on, not least in reports, detailed reports that it has provided, both in respect of alleged casualty figures and in this very often repeated allegation of famine in Gaza, which we have thoroughly debunked, not just with analysis on the information, on the factual information that's available, but also looking at the applicable international legal framework and being clear about what Israel's obligations are under it. So I think those are the primary mechanisms through which those allegations are being put forward. But we also have, the abuse of international law through legal terminology, canards like occupation, ethnic cleansing, apartheid, genocide. Those are all legal terms that have now been deployed very frequently and forcefully against Israel incorrectly, entirely incorrectly. But they are gathering steam. And they are gathering, I think, import in terms of the way that they're being deployed. And that's important because I see this as a phenomenon of lawfare, which is an abuse of law, international law here specifically. And that sits in parallel with the misrepresentations about the factual position. But law being what it is, I appreciate it's an impenetrable subject for many people. Legal literacy being what it is, and then knowledge of international law being even more bespoke and niche. These people that are promoting these representations are very much better able to get away with pulling the wool over the people's eyes. So one of the key missions I see myself as having is trying to educate and trying to give more people the tools with which to push back on these misrepresentations, in particular of international law.
Without giving him greater popularity on this show, the person you're about to debate has made a career basically out of Jew hatred and smearing Israel. Seems like a perfect storm, what's happened in this last year, in the sense that at the moment that society is valuing truth at the lowest it's ever valued it, in terms of news, in terms of law, in terms of all of that, and anti-Semitism now is becoming more and more socially acceptable. This war fits into a perfect box for that, in the sense that it really doesn't matter what Israel does. This is a perfect opportunity to lay on Israel as the ultimate representative of the Jewish people all of these accusations, true, not true. The accusations have swung back and forth all throughout the war. And my question to you is, when you finish these debates, or when you finish your presentations with Douglas Murray, or do you feel like you have moved people, or do you feel like you're from undecideds into a camp that is more supportive of Israel? Or do you feel like you're giving Israel supporters more tools to go out and advocate on their own?
So ultimately, it depends on the individual situation and the context, and invariably it seems to be a mixture of all of those. One occasion on which there was actually a measure of this was the debate that I did with Douglas in Toronto as part of the Monk debate series. That was against Mehdi Hassan and Gideon Levy, and it's a situation where they take a vote at the beginning and at the end, and they see what the swing has been. And there was a shift towards our position of the debate. The motion was that anti-Semitism and, that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And so in that case, to the extent that one can trust the voting before and after, there was certainly a shift in people's opinions being recorded, and some indication that we had convinced certain people in the audience. What I would say in terms of the volume of feedback that I receive, that is invariably from very frustrated individuals who get it, who understand what it is that is happening when we hear these allegations being levied against Israel, who see this as the modern form of anti-Semitism, as the modern blood libels, because what is being said is so fantastically, in some situations, untrue. And so that is a case, I suppose, of giving strength and confidence even to those that are perhaps already sympathetic or supportive of Israel, or at least have the underlying knowledge to understand that the received wisdom, as it is increasing, is not reflective of reality. But I think that you pick up on a very important point here. Now, I've mentioned the modern blood libels and this kind of modern manifestation of anti-Semitism. And to my mind, that is why it has been so successful and it is so pervasive. And it seems impervious to the truth and reality in so many respects. And we see this playing out most substantially in mainstream media, of course, on another level on social media. But I think that the ancient blood libel, that Jews killed Christian children to use their blood for religious ritual, seems ridiculous to many people today, but it was extremely widely believed. In some parts of the world, it is unfortunately still believed and propagated. I've seen manifestations of it on some Middle Eastern soap operas, television programs. But I think we need to bear in mind that as pervasive and as widespread that ancient blood libel was, albeit so fantastically untrue, the modern blood libels are increasingly becoming widely believed despite their falsehoods. If we cast our minds back, I recall a Swedish newspaper, Aftonbladet, many years ago reporting that Israel was essentially harvesting Palestinian organs, stealing organs from Palestinians. I mean, grotesquely untrue. And it was relatively swiftly shut down, certainly my recollection of that incident, that episode, and discredited. Now the volume of that level of misinformation, of Israel targeting children or driving up the casualty count, or even reports that we saw very recently of this allegation of Israel shooting children in the head, which has been thoroughly debunked. I mean, even the photos that supported this article have been shown to be complete nonsense. But the fact that those types of stories are even making it through editorial boards at otherwise respected print outlets is deeply troubling, and I think reflective very much of how widespread this modern manifestation of anti-Semitism against the Jewish state is becoming. All the more reason to push back, I think, even more robustly on all of the falsehoods.
What kind of upbringing did you experience that produced this kind of passion and clarity that makes you the speaker that you are today?
Before I came to the law, well, I grew up in London.
Whereabouts in London?
In Kensington. So not exactly the Jewish community. And I think that was probably pretty integral. I had a wonderful opportunity to go to an incredible school, a truly well-regarded school that gave me a wonderful education. But it also brought me face to face with the very manifestation of the sort of anti-Israel agenda that so many people have come to see more forcibly over the 12 months that have just passed. I saw that from my very first week at that school. Amnesty International, which had a student representation on campus, if you will, this is at high school, were writing a letter writing campaign that first week encouraging an arms embargo against Israel. One may think, plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. None of what we're witnessing, unfortunately, over the last 12 months is new. In fact, so much of it has been decades in the making, but the volume and the aggression with which it has been put forward is certainly come on leaps and bounds. So, as an 11-year-old, my first week, having to contend and argue against, I wrote my own letter. That was supportive of the close trading relationship that existed between the UK and Israel, and called on greater and more closer cooperation even. And the organizers of the campaign at my high school refused to send it. And when I challenged this was run by sixth form girls. I mean, these girls were 7 years older than me at the time. But when I challenged them on the specifics of the case that they were putting forward, of course, they were completely ignorant and unable to answer or contend with, the most basic position that I was advancing. And that very much formed, I suppose, my outlook and the need that I felt to make sure that I was as up on and educated on these issues and developments as I possibly could be. And I think that very naturally led me into international law as part of my academic focus, because it very quickly became apparent to me that international law was being used as the modern mechanism to advance that modern anti-Semitism, the acceptable face of anti-Semitism being anti-Zionism. And it was only years after I think I had already come to that realization that I heard the articulation of the late great Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, who was formerly the chief rabbi of the United Kingdom. When he talked about the evolution of anti-Semitism, he talked about it mutating to focus on international law and human rights, because that had become the order of the day. The mark of everything that is good in the world. And therefore, that is what was being manipulated against Israel. And I think that's why we've seen, first of all, the targeting, yes, of the Jewish state, the nation state, but also the targeting through this lawfare and these manipulations of what international law says. And I appreciate entirely that not everyone can go and do a law degree or, practice in the profession or go into academia. And certainly in the academy, there are enormous barriers to anyone who hasn't drunk the Kool-Aid on Israel being admitted, being given a position at a university, being fairly subject to peer review and papers that they write. So there has been a dearth of critical analysis when it comes to these issues in the International Legal Academy. And that is inextricably linked in so many respects with international law more broadly in the international community. I mean, we only need to see where some of the judges from the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, are coming from. America's recent appointment, Cleveland, was a professor at Columbia Law School. And in fact, she was teaching there while I was visiting as a fellow in the International Security Law Program. So there are big reasons that I think my sort of later focus on international law came about. But I suppose being confronted with all of this from a relatively early age gave me a bit of a head start, both on the challenges and on swatting up to meet them.
And at what point did you move to Israel? And how did that shape your life?
So I took a break when I was at Skadden. I went to do my master's at Tel Aviv University. So I took initially a sort of year sabbatical, if you will, after I'd been practicing, and ended up staying a little over a year. I did the master's in a sort of truncated fashion and then did my clerkship at the Supreme Court in Jerusalem. And certainly being in Israel was invaluable. I think that the best means of communicating what that country means stands for, what comprises it, the values and the opportunities that it offers to all of its citizens, no matter what race they are, or religion. All of that, one only really gets, I think, a proper impression of it through being there, which is also why I think, trips, taking media people and policymakers, politicians, artists, influencers, business people, taking them to Israel is the best way of educating on what it is that the country stands for, and combating an awful lot of the misrepresentations that you see. But it really gave me, I think, a strong grounding, both in the country and an understanding. I studied Hebrew while I was out there as well, but also in the legal system. And that was pretty significant when we came to the issue of legal reforms, how politics and the legal fraternity interplay in Israel, which were of course a topic of enormous debate before the 7th of October. I fully anticipate that the country will return to that debate. But of course, there are far more pressing immediate matters of national security to contend with in advance of that.
And when you came back from Israel to the UK, did you carry with you a certain stigma because you had stamped on your resume a kind of, Jewish star, Israeli flag that says, this is where my master's is from, this is where I clerked at a Supreme Court? Did people look at you different, or did you not mind it?
That's a very good question. And I have to say, if they have, then it hasn't been noticeable to me. They've certainly kept it from me. I have to say, I started speaking out about this already while I was at Skadden. I was there during Skadden in 2014. So I've been doing this a little while. I did have the opportunity and permission to do quite a lengthy radio interview and a debate, if you will, in the studio in the course of Protective Edge, that operation back in 2014. But I think I have always been so outspoken on the subject that anyone who's known me will have been clear about where I stand. I've never hidden. I've frequently been speaking at universities, even before I came to the bar. And the wonderful thing about being at the bar, we have a split profession here in the United Kingdom, so solicitors and barristers. Barristers wear the wig and gown, and we're independent practitioners. So each of us are our own boss. I'm a member of a very supportive set of chambers, and everyone there has always understood, I think, from the get-go, especially because I came straight from Israel to Six Pump Court to practice, that they, certainly understood where I had been, where I was coming from, and valued the insights that I was able to bring. It's becoming rarer, perhaps, but there is still a breed of intellectual who is, honest about where their knowledge may run out. And there are many people that I know and hold in very high regard as colleagues who will be frank about the fact that they don't feel comfortable basing their opinion or their assessment on what they hear on the BBC because it's so out of sync with, say, what it is that they might hear from webinars with UK Lawyers for Israel or talks that I've given. And I think that's extremely valuable and important. And that provides also an opportunity with many of these individuals to educate. They are going to be eager to hear the facts and eager to learn.
My last question, as you travel around the world, whether it be UK, Europe, I'll count those as two different things, UK, Europe, Canada.
They are now.
They are now, right. Canada, the United States. What is your impression of the trend? Are we moving in a direction where truth is going to end up winning the day? In Israel, will the light of truth is going to shine and redeem Israel from many of these accusations? Or is this scourge of anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism going to continue growing? Is it better in the United States than it is in the UK? Are people more open to these arguments in the United States? Are we going to follow Europe in terms of a future trend line? How do you interpret the future, if I could ask you to predict it?
That's probably something I ought to steer well away from in terms of predictions. But I think my abiding impression is that there are two very strong trajectories here. And one undeniably, is the negativity, the anti-Israel sentiment, ultimately this kind of modern form of anti-Semitism that we're seeing expressed. We've seen the way it's gaining traction over social media. We've seen, the very short window that the media allowed for sympathy, even for Israel, immediately after the 7th of October, 2023. And the outrageous falsehoods that have been propagated since then. So that's undeniable. And I don't think I'm, creating I don't think what I've said there is in any way groundbreaking for people. Everyone can see this on full display. But what I have also seen up close and personal while I've been traveling around is the immense pushback against this and the unity that it has occasioned across the Jewish community around the world, as well as with respect to Jews, Israelis in Israel, not just Jews. I mean, the fact that I have seen many Israeli Arabs stepping up and saying, I have no other country, is also enormously encouraging. Now, which of those trajectories ultimately, wins out is what I wouldn't want to predict. But the enormity of the sentiment, effort, initiative that I have seen in the second case gives me tremendous hope for the future. Israel has come through a great deal of troubled times in the past, and to see the way that both the community has come together to fight the physical battles, as well as what is being described in some places, as this eighth front, the battles of misrepresentations and delegitimization, is truly inspiring. But I would say what has given me more hope than all of that combined was one particular visit, and this was a visit to Gaza. And this was last month. I went in with the 162nd Division a few days, very tragically, after they had recovered the bodies of the murdered hostages from one of the tunnels. And we went along the Philadelphia corridor and we went into Rafah. And through several days of briefings, but also the time that was spent on the ground in Gaza, the abiding optimism that I had came from seeing a fighting force, a defensive force that had been through certainly the trauma that all of Israel had experienced on the 7th of October, and then the immense, in some respects, immeasurable challenges that followed immediately after, including grappling with a terror organization that has spent 16 years with, enormous international support and obviously Iranian munitions, building up its terror infrastructure in every second house, sometimes every single house, in schools, hospitals, mosques, and through that tunnel system, which it was pretty difficult to imagine, how Israel would be able to contend with that. And the fact that while I was there, we were receiving updates and briefings on how the IDF was at that moment fighting through the tunnels and making faster progress below ground in some respects than above ground was certainly a metaphor, if you will, to how it is that the IDF had encountered these challenges and met them and was continuing to advance in defense of Israel in its efforts to recover the hostages and defeat the threat that Hamas posed. And I have to say, that was before even the advances and the incredible, in some respects, miraculous successes that have been carefully documented in the last couple of months against Hezbollah. So the optimism that I take certainly from Israel's progress on the military side of things in defense of the people of Israel is tremendous. And ultimately, whatever the position with respect to those two battling forces, the defense of Israel and the progress on that front is unquestionable. And when one thinks about the previous challenges that the state of Israel has faced and how it has overcome those, I think we'll probably look back on this period with similar awe and ultimately with an immense degree of pride in what has been achieved and with immense gratitude to those people who have given their lives for that purpose.
If Israel is to be vindicated in the court of public opinion and in the courtrooms, it's going to happen through people like you. So I want to thank you, Natasha, for joining us today. And I want to thank Randy Freed for making the connection between us, a valued member of our community, and always on the lookout for guests to bring here to Valley Beth Shalom. I know you were here in September for just several days, and you're going to be here in November for just several days. So the next time, God willing, we'll be able to lock down a date to actually bring you here to the community to visit with everybody. We would love to welcome you as a guest speaker and a teacher. Natasha, b'hatzlacha, best of luck to you. May your voice continue to grow in strength, and may your message be amplified throughout the world.